Today's topic is, what is Ayurveda? How is it helpful? And how can we take these concepts and make our lives better? So I found the best person, or a person that I think would be really great to talk to, who will answer these questions. His name is Lew Epstein. He is a psychotherapist, and his specialization is in marriage and family counseling. He's been in practice for over 40 years, and he helps his patients with all sorts of really great therapies, not just with the mind, but also the body. So Lew, go ahead. First off, what is Ayurveda?
Okay, Leah, let me start with that because it's not familiar to people in the West. It's from India. It's an ancient folk medicine that probably goes back 3,000 to 5,000 years. And I guess the reason that people believe in it is partly because it's still around. And I have a pretty long relationship with Ayurveda because I would say it dates back to about 1995 or 1996 for me, when I first got involved with this very interesting alternative health and holistic method of healing. And it's actually even more than that. It's actually a system of everything from astrology to looking at the world in very holistic ways, about even the way we're connected to each other, to our relationships to the sun as a planet. So it's almost like a philosophy of life, and it ties in with yoga and meditation. And I think the tricky part for people in this day and age to connect with something like Ayurveda, which, by the way, I should say what it means. Arya is the science or study of, and Veda has to do with life. So we could say it's and we won't call it science in the modern sense. Let's call it the study of life. So it has a very wide breadth of knowledge and wisdom and philosophy. And I guess the question of why is it still around? How has it stood the test of time? I would say, and in my own experience, is because it works. Very practically, that it's something that I found, with all its mystical parts and strange Indian Sanskrit words, it seems to heal. So, and that's why it's an interesting relationship to science, because science is often about, well, how do we explain this? And sometimes things can't be explained exactly in the original way that they were intended, but if they work, then people keep coming back for it. Just like acupuncture and Chinese medicine. You say, well, how does 5 elements Chinese medicine, why is it so popular? Well, it's popular because people find that it's helpful. And so that's what I found with this traditional Indian medicine and holistic system of healing. Now, it's based on the similar things that Chinese medicine, and it's again an alien kind of concepts to us, because it starts with the elements, and the elements, I've written them down, are air, water, wind, earth, and fire. And you can say, well, gee, how does that relate to science? And it doesn't relate to modern science. And yet it seems to be a part of something called, and I'm going to introduce another word, the doshas. And the doshas are things that have to do with forces around us that involve these elements. But what I would say, the way it works for me, and the same way Chinese medicine works, which has to do with the yin and the yang, it's about balance, or I guess what in science we would call homeostasis. How do we find balance? And we know, and this is the way I got connected to it, because there are times in our lives that we're out of balance, and we know it. It's subjective at times, but that's the theory within Ayurveda and other holistic systems of healing that have to do with when we end up with something called disease. So the disease process in Ayurveda has to do with being out of balance in these various parts of our bodies and our spirits. And when we go out of balance, eventually we end up with something, if it's not corrected, if we stay out of balance, and I think we kind of know somewhat what we're talking about. I wrote down a list of when I go out of balance, what it feels like. Well, when I go out of balance, my mood is usually a little off. My anxiety level can be higher. My thoughts are sometimes a little more rushed and obsessive. My gut doesn't feel right. Something feels a little off there. My breathing is off. I'm breathing more rapidly. My appetite may be off. Sometimes when I have a low appetite, I know that something's out of balance, or my energy is low, or my sleep is disturbed, or I'm irritable. So those are the things that I know it's not unique to me, but when we're out of balance, we kind of know it, even if we can't exactly measure it. So, and holistically, we could be out of balance for a number of reasons. It could even be we have to do with our relationships. So if our relationships are out of balance, let's say, oh, I'm in conflict with my wife, well, that could be part of the imbalance. Or my work life, something is too stressed there. Or friendships could be off. The things I'm taking in from the media, or the things that I'm watching on television. So all these things, and especially the seasons, like if we're going through a very cold season, and I'm not kind of dealing with the season well, I could go out of balance, and we all can. So let's go back to these elements: air, water, fire, earth, and wind. And we said that they're something that compose the doshas, which are all around us and within us. So let me explain the three-part system. One of those doshas, of the three of them, is called pitta. And the pitta dosha, composed of the elements water and fire, have to do with a lot to do with heat. And if you think of our body, well, a lot of it has to do with a kind of a regulating system of heat and digestion and metabolism. And another dosha of the three is vata. And vata in the Indian system has to do with a lot of wind and air. And when we're off, and when something's off with that, well, very frequently our gut is off. And the interesting thing is that's where it's regulated mostly, is the gut. And kapha or kapha has to do with water and earth. And when that is out of balance, and if we're tended to be a kapha constitution, which I'll go into more, we could be lethargic and slow, and even feel a low energy around what we need to do and move. So, and this goes along with studies of body types. There was an American kind of physiologist who studied body types in the 1950s. His name was Sheldon. And he talked about three body types. And this kind of goes a little bit along with these doshas. He called about something called the ectomorph, which was the skinny person who tends to be nervous and, and was all skin and bone. The endomorph, which heavier and having more flesh and bone and solid mass. And the mesomorph, more muscular, so emphasizing muscle. And I'm going to go through each of these body types because I think it's more what we can relate to and how we go out of balance and what these body types represent. So vata, okay, let's start with that. The vata personality, the vata constitution. Vata has to do with the nervous system. It has to do with respiration. It controls movement and creativity and energy and activation. So many things we do as human beings are attached to what we'll call vata. And as we said, the the personality. And I think we could all say that we have part of that within us. Maybe it's not dominant, but we've met people who are Vata types, skinny, anxious, very cerebral, very sensitive to cold, intense, active, and again, very reactive to situations and people. So I could say that we all have been in contact with Vata personalities. Maybe we have Vata within ourselves as a dominant thing or not. Okay, so what are the qualities of Vata? What do you think? But let me ask, what do you think Vata season is? If you were to relate it to this, this dosha, this force, this energy field, what do you think Vata would do? What season would it have to do with?
Vata would prefer summer, warmth.
Yes, they would prefer it, but the season that has the most of this cold, windy, the qualities of Vata, rough, dry, brittle, intense, and kinetic. So actually the season that is Vata season is fall going into winter. So from fall to winter, you have this Vata season. And the Vata season has all those cold and windy and rough. And even if you're in a warmer climate, and even in the tropics, there is still the variation of a season where it's more windy and a little bit colder and rougher. So it is true, even throughout the world, that there is a Vata season, even in the tropics. And if someone has a dominant Vata, let's say they're skinny and their nerves are easily frayed and everything like that. When Vata is out of balance, or someone who has that particularly dominant part of them, what do you think they will exhibit? What are the qualities that they'll exhibit? Well, they probably exhibit anxiety. They probably exhibit shivering or extreme sensitivity to cold. They might have a lot of anxiety and thoughts about things. They might worry a lot more than they would normally in another season even. And let me ask another question. What would be a bad lunch situation? Let's say it's Vata season and someone who has that constitution. What do you think would be a bad lunch situation? Have any thoughts about that?
I do. Let's see. Well, my understanding is Vata likes warm foods. So like a borscht would probably be a dish that Vata would not like, or a cold smoothie in the wintertime. Did I get that right?
You did. I actually wrote down here that Vata, what would throw Vata even more out of balance would be, here's a lunch during Vata season for a Vata dominant person. A bunch of crackers with raw vegetables and a glass of ice water, all eaten on the run during a work meeting. Now, why might that throw Vata out of balance?
Because the Vata is already cold,
Yes.
and they should have warming foods. And I think I know this because I think I fall into this category.
Oh, yeah, to a degree. I mean, remember, you might have dominant Vata. You may have a mixture. I'm actually considered what's Pitta Vata, which means that I have a very muscular, and I'll go through some of the other qualities of Pitta, but I also have Vata, and I can be extremely sensitive to cold, and I can go into certain, if I throw myself out of balance with this type of diet, or if I over-exercise even, that could actually throw me off. So you're right about it. Instead of the crackers, you'd want, I guess, let's think of a good Vata meal.
Well, I can think that I'll just say a warm, hot vegetable soup with potatoes.
Exactly. You got it. That's it. That would be it.
Okay, well, what do I like? That's easy.
Yeah, and the soup is very important because what it also does, it doesn't stress the digestive system, because if vata is about air, well, guess what? What part of the digestive system is out of balance when vata is? It's the colon. So the idea of gas and air and wind, you can see how that would work. So the idea of soup, well, what does soup do? It breaks down some of the elements of vegetables and it makes them easier to digest, so that the vata, the vata constitution can take that in as warm. And I would even say what would be good for vata would be, and I know that we don't want to put a lot of oils and things, but I would say that, let's say eggplant with a little bit of oil, and it was kind of roasted, or that would actually be good for vata. And I know that, you know, there's a question about oils and ghee and things like that. But I actually would say that for vata, a little bit of that, if they're going to have a salad, they actually need something on it that will make it a little easier to digest.
So my favorite oil, I don't have oils, but my favorite one is sesame. A little bit of sesame oil and Asian food of any type just makes it that much more delectable.
Well, you know, that's so interesting to say that, because sesame oil is one of the oils that balances vata specifically. And I'll tell you something else in the whole thing about, because there's a lot of things within certain healing things of Ayurveda, that sesame oil is the primary oil to be heated and used externally too, in massage.
Right.
So it's an interesting thing that you mentioned sesame, which is a very strong balancer of vata in all its forms. The other thing would be, if you're into any aromatherapy, the balancing of vata is lavender.
I don't like lavender. Lavender and but I know people love it. Now for the sesame oil, if someone was going to apply it to their skin, would they use a cold pressed type? What type of sesame oil do they recommend?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, I mean, I always recommend people using organic products, no matter whether they use it in their body or or internally. So it doesn't have to be toasted sesame oil if you're using it on your body, and it should be heated. And when it's warmed, and not, of course, not to the point of burning, then a good Ayurvedic massage, a self-massage called an abhyanga, can be done. And especially during a cold season, it has dramatic effects on people who have a vata constitution.
How does one heat sesame oil before applying it to skin? In the microwave, or how does?
No, I would say, I mean, just, you know, you can microwave it, but I tend to be more traditional. I just put it in a container, like a metal container, and have it heated, and then it cools off if you put it in something ceramic, if it's, you know, and then you just want to bring it to not to something that's so hot that it has to boil, but just so that it eventually comes to a warming thing, and that it's manageable for your skin to take. We don't want anything that burns, but the massage that you would do would be circular motions around all the major muscles in the chest and legs and everything, and also around the joints. Joints are very important in this.
Yeah, and so you're saying to put the oil maybe on a pan, maybe put it warm, and then take that and pour it into like a glass or ceramic, and then from there you would go from lower to upper, right? You would go.
Well, you can go from lower to upper. The thing is, you're always circulating inward towards the major organs. When you're doing your chest or stomach, it's like circles and inward. And that's the same thing over the major muscles of the legs and everything. You're kind of using circular motions and circular motions around the joints. And then if you really wanted to keep it to the degree that it would be most beneficial, you'd keep it on for about 20 minutes.
And then you take a towel and wipe it off?
I would say you could do a shower, a warm shower, But I would say, let it stay on the skin. We don't often think of the skin as an organ, but it's the largest organ of the body. So this is very, very healing to to the warm oils. And it actually stays, if it stays on, I don't mean stays on in the sense that you're completely oily, but it will stay on there if you don't soap it off in a shower or bath. You don't want to soap it off. You want to actually leave it somewhere on. You could put on an old, an old bathrobe or something that you don't mind getting a little bit of oil on it. And eventually it will dry on the body, but it will be there in some form that remains somewhat healing to the body. And you'll see that it sort of does a lot of things as far as keeping heat and temperature okay. And it actually, our skin is fairly permeable. So the sesame oil in particular is just a good oil for that, especially if you have a Vata constitution. So you just want to kind of leave it on after the shower. When I say leave it on, don't rub it off and don't soap it off. Leave it there for a while.
So if you're won't the oil just get all over the shower and then have it be like kind of dangerous and slippery?
Well, I mean, the thing about it is you can put a good bath mat on, but as it's coming off and as you're showering, the oil will go down the drain, and eventually when it mixes with the water, it will eventually dissipate, and you do have to clean up a little after this, but the benefits far outweigh the little bit of the mess that you will get. You will get rid of the oils and other things, but my suggestion is that my recommendation is that it's worth it. And I wouldn't say you're doing this during the hottest season of the year. I see it's much better during the cooler months. And it has a very healing effect.
And how often should one do this?
Well, I mean, I think that, once every week, if it's during a cold season, once every 3 days would probably be helpful. You'll see the noticeable effects with the warming that it provides, and the skin will have a different tone after it's almost the skin needs a certain amount of oil. And remember, we said during Vata season and someone with a Vata constitution, what happens? Skin gets rougher and it gets drier. And a lot of people that complain about dry skin, unfortunately, don't know that this oil massage can be very beneficial. They're taking a lot of other things, they're putting on certain creams, but they're not realizing that the oil massage is extremely beneficial. So
what I do, I'll take a drop or two of oil and I'll put the lotion, I'll mix it in with my lotion and put that on. So that way I've got the oil and the lotion and I can just wear that all day.
Yeah, no, that's fine, and that provides a lot of what we're talking about, the healing part. Okay, so that's a Vata thing. But let me go on into the thing about what we're calling the Pitta constitution. And Pitta involves, I mean, if you look at from the elements, and I know a lot of people don't buy into the elements, but it's fire and water. So the parts of the constitution, the human constitution, that it has to do with is, guess what? Of course, digestion, metabolism, heat production, and a lot of our most incisive thinking, our intelligence, are sort of controlled or connected to this energy or this force. So the Pitta constitution, moderately muscular, sharp appetite, usually, and the qualities they also show is very good articulate and good speaker. There's unfortunately a tendency towards sometimes irritation, anger, and judgment. Usually Pitta constitution people are open to new ideas. They're very organized and they're highly responsible. So you go into the personality types that go along with this musculature and this constitution. And it's interesting how often it does add up when you see someone who has the dominant Pitta, which is something actually that I have, but I said it's mixed with Pitta and Vata. Okay, so the qualities of Pitta as an energy or as a force, well, I guess you can guess: hot, mobile, sharp, fluid, and oily. So Pitta season, what is it? Summer. And the thing that's interesting about Pitta is that, well, that's the season when you can imagine these different forces, but it also is a season in which Pitta can go out of balance. Like if I have a Pitta dominant constitution, which I do, and I were to stay on the beach all day, that would be too much sun for me. It would throw Pitta out of balance. And when Pitta is out of balance, because I know this, digestion is usually poor. In other words, remember, Pitta is usually fiery and it's burning up everything in its path. It's got a good, strong digestive fire called Agni in the
and
Sanskrit.
probably a little hot-tempered, right?
Yes. Well, that's the thing about Pitta when it goes out of balance. What happens is, since Pitta is involved in body temperature, like if you see a Pitta personality out of balance, they might look very red in the face and sweaty. They might be irritable and even driven. And I know that even as a Pitta dominant constitution, I know that I can overdo things. Like if I was a farmer and you said to me, yeah, why don't you do that one field and just plow it? I think in my Pitta constitution in mind, I would think, I don't have to stop at one. I could do 3 fields. See, there's kind of a tendency to overdo. And well, guess what the imbalance would also show? Heartburn and peptic ulcer and diarrhea. So the things about Pitta being out of balance are really very viscerally felt. And it has to most be monitored and be mindfully looked at during Pitta season predominantly. Because remember, it's not like one person is purely Pitta, like we have different parts. I just don't have as much of a kapha part, which we'll go into. So what might be, another thing, what might be a bad lunch situation for someone with a Pitta constitution during Pitta season? What do you think?
Oh, something bland. I think they would prefer like something spicy, like something like a Mexican spice dish. So I don't like anything bland. It's got to have a lot of.
I'm so glad you're saying that, because actually Pitta is drawn to that. They're drawn to the spicy and the hot. But here's the problem. Just because we're drawn to it doesn't mean it's good for us, because that's exactly what will throw Pitta out of balance. So you're right. Pitta will say, oh, give me another one of those, hot tamales. And it's exactly what will, unfortunately, throw their digestive tract and other things out of balance. So in order to balance Pitta, which is drawn and has so much to do with heat, well, I'll give you the bad thing, the bad scenario for a Pitta at lunch. After playing a competitive game of tennis in the hot sun, the Pitta personality takes a shot of tequila and has salsa and salty chips with some salami. Now that scenario is guaranteed to throw Pitta out of balance, because they're already overheated from the tennis. They're in the sun and they're having something that will heat them up, alcohol, of course. Salsa, well, we know what that does. Salt, too much salt, and salami. So now, what might keep Pitta better in balance? Well, let's say instead of a competitive game, they did something a little more relaxing.
Golf?
Something that would not be so, because Pitta can get very competitive. They might have
golf.
Yes, golf. And remember, even then they'd have to stay, they couldn't stay in the sun too long because that would overheat. And they would need to, let's say they could take a good shower afterwards and cool down. And then for lunch, they might have like, Pitta would be balanced by a salad, some lighter foods, maybe some vegetables, but certainly not meats. Meats of all kinds will overheat. And I mean, we know there's a health problem with a lot of meats anyway, but it's particularly, it would throw Pitta completely out of balance. So
and
Pitta
everybody else.
And everybody else, yeah. Right. All right, so that's Pitta. And, I'm familiar with that because I've had to work with that part of me over time and not overheat and not overdo and not get into competitive situations, because that is what throws things out of balance. Now let's go on to the third part. It's called kapha. And kapha, the basic constitution, has to do with structure. It's composed of the elements earth and water. And so the parts of kapha are heaviness and firmness of bones and muscles, and even the resistance to disease that's in our immune systems is governed by this force. And if you see a kapha personality, I mean, a kapha constitution, it's not that unusual. They're usually very strong and well-proportioned bodies. But the problem is they tend to carry excess weight. They have a great deal of strength and a great deal of resilience. And like in the kapha, when their sleep cycle is long and very sound, and kapha is not easily aggravated. When they're out of balance, they'll be aggravated. But we've all met kapha personalities who are calmer. You can almost say that they're thick-skinned. If the vata is thin-skinned, then kapha is thick-skinned because not as much gets to them. Okay, so the quality of the dosha kapha, and the season, by the way, is very late winter into spring. And you know, you can almost feel it in our guts. When you're entering spring, sometimes it's almost like we need a cleanse, or we need to somehow purge ourselves of the winter because we've eaten heavier foods. And here we're going into something else that requires a lightness. But the qualities of kapha, again, are heavy, oily, stable, slimy, and gelatinous. And of course, that doesn't mean the body is always that way. But you know, when I work with kapha constitutions, people who have that constitution in my private practice, I'll recommend a daily aerobic. Now, I wouldn't recommend that for a vata personality. I don't not necessarily need a heavy aerobic every day, but a kapha, it's almost like their whole outlook. It changes when they need to exercise at that level. And if they don't, they become lethargic and even moody and things like that. So if you're dealing with a person with a kapha personality and you're recommending things, it would be something, a little bit heavier activity, and aerobics and a lot of movement. See, if you do that with a vata personality, you'd probably say, would you do a little more yoga and meditation?
No,
Kapha,
probably more like running, jogging, swimming.
yes. Yes,
right.
Swimming, perfect thing, yes. So when kapha is out of balance, well, their physique looks softer and weaker, the digestion slows, and a lot of times with kapha, unfortunately, there's a bigger production of mucus. So the upper respiratory problems that often happen with somebody with a kapha thing are, unfortunately, there's just a lot of phlegm, a lot of mucus, a flabbiness, and unfortunately, they'll excessively sleep. And their personality things that would come out are intolerance and insecurity and jealousy, which is not their regular qualities when they're in balance. So, okay, here, I'll give you the bad lunch situation for kapha. Okay, let's say it's a warm and sultry noon in the spring. And after sleeping most of the morning with no exercise, the person with the kapha dominant constitution sits down to a heavy lunch of spaghetti smothered in some kind of oil or butter with meatballs and a nice ice cream sundae for dessert. So why would this contribute to kapha imbalance? Well, all the qualities of kapha, soft, slow, stable, oily, heavy. See, and if you want to change that, well, again, kapha will do well with salads. They will do well with vegetables, very well with vegetables. And, you know, so.
They
Hmm?
might do well with maybe just a pasta, but with the vegetables on it instead of like the meat stuff.
Yes,
Maybe just
very
like
much.
marinara, right?
Exactly. Yes, if they can do moderate amount of pasta are okay, but the vegetables um, are of such an important part of a kapha lifestyle that they did. If anyone was truly to benefit, and we all would, by let's say a vegan diet, it would be kapha. And yet, let's say we all would, but kapha particularly, because it would never throw kapha out of balance. Occasionally, there are parts of veganism that might, some elements of it with the raw vegetables, if you're eating a raw diet, that would throw vata out of balance because the digestive system is not that strong as kapha. And so you could throw a vata constitution could go out of balance if they don't, let's say, boil or have the soups, if they instead eat raw all the time.
And the first dosha too, and the first dosha,
That's
because
vata, yeah.
oh, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, and so people can just search on the internet to find out which dosha they lean more toward. As
Yes, and let me
website.
make that recommendation right now. I would say that I think I mentioned this to you one point, that if you go to online Banyan Botanicals and look them up, they have a very good website, and you could even chat with a representative there, but also they do a good evaluation of your constitution, and you could determine where you are on this constitutional area and what kind of diet and herbs and things might be helpful to keep you in balance. Because the thing about the three doshas is they're almost like warring siblings. Like, unfortunately, our tendency is to sometimes go out of balance for many reasons, many reasons. And so since we're all composed of these doshas, maybe one may be more dominant, but we're actually working throughout our lives to stay in balance. And that's not so easy. And the concept of disease within the Ayurvedic philosophy and system is disease is the result of a holistic imbalance that is viewed as a process. In other words, it's not an event. It's a process or a progression rather than, oh, these cells ran amok or bacteria attacked our bodies. That's not the way Ayurveda looks at the world. Like it would start with, let's say somebody had a moderate imbalance, which would be some acid reflux. And that would be looked at, it would need to be rebalanced perhaps by some fasting, maybe introducing a certain parts of diet and changing other parts that are too sharp or too acidic. But the more severe thing, when it starts turning into something called disease, would be after a long process of, let's say someone had acid reflux for 20 years. Well, then you could be in the disease phase of imbalance, which would be esophageal cancer. So remember, it's looked at as process, not as event, not as disease is not seen as, oh, those microbes, boy, they really, they really attack the system. No, the microbes are always there, according to Ayurveda. So some other aspects of Ayurveda, it's a very broad and vast pharmacopoeia, which is the amount of tonics and herbs and plants and medicines are really tremendous, going back thousands of years. I could say that, well, of course, food is looked at as medicine also. And medicine in the sense that it's the major source of rebalancing the entire system. So when someone's out of balance, diet is so essential to that. And if you went to an Ayurvedic practitioner, they would mostly be prescribing changes in dietary habits, exercise, and possibly sleep.
And adding herbs and spices.
I'm sorry?
And adding a bunch of herbs and spices.
Yes. It's yes, so important that you say that, because let's say I was feeling a vata imbalance. I was during the very cold months of this year. So I could be cold and anxious. My mood could be down a little. I'm a little hyper. I'm not sleeping well. So how would I balance that? Well, I would say my diet at that point, along with these, I'm talking about the massages and probably yoga and meditation, but I might have, my meals might include particularly dal, and dal is what's called tridoshic. There are certain mung dals and others that are very good for whether you're pitta or vata or dominant kapha. There are certain dals and that are easily to digest and are good for each of the doshas.
Are you
So I would
talking
probably,
about the lentils?
yes, but not just
Okay.
any lentils. There's something, look up mung dal is a
Yeah,
particular,
yeah, I've tried that. Yeah, and you can
it's
actually,
particularly good and
yeah,
balancing.
you can soak it and then
Yes,
blend it, and then you can make it until your plant kind of like a omelet.
yes, yes. No, that's a very good recipe. And is a book, I don't have it right handy now, but there is a book about Ayurvedic cooking that's a classic, which I should have it now, but I don't have it with me. But it's about Ayurvedic recipes, and it even has what it's good for as far as keeping things, what would balance this and balance that. I think it's the Ayurvedic book of, well, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
So a good meal for balancing vata that's out of balance would be dal or rice sometimes. I was saying eggplants and other vegetables with, we said a little bit of maybe sesame oil.
Mhm.
What I would do is I'd also sip ginger tea throughout the day. Now, ginger tea is particularly good balancing element because it's also, ginger is heating. So if you're feeling cold, ginger is a good balancer. If I was out of balance, I'd do yoga and meditation. I'd listen to soothing music. I'd take a warm bath. I think the thing to probably have, and hot almond milk, or one of the milks that, like a non-dairy milk with cinnamon for breakfast. The herbs that I take daily, and I'll say them to you, they're not American sounding. So I take something called ashwagandha, which is a tonic type of herb that balances the nervous system. It's also good for digestion. It has a number of good qualities. And the other thing, here's another thing, it's called chayavan prash. And
That one
chayavan,
I've not heard of.
okay,
That,
chayavan, yes.
yeah. How do you
It can,
spell that one?
I think it's CHYAVANPRASH. Chayavan prash. It's I would say it's more of I won't say tonic, but it has the qualities of tonic. It's made up of so many different parts of fruits. I would be careful, of course, if you're sensitive to sugar, because from all of these fruits that it's taken from, dried fruits and others, it's sweet. And
Well,
so
I love sweet.
okay, yeah, well,
Yeah, I don't like the ones that are supposed to be super healthy, like the turmeric and the ginger, and I don't like any of those. They're just bitter. I like sweet.
yeah, and by the way, that shows that the part that would be sweet is the part of that is part of a kapha taste, is sweet, and that's fine. And it actually, sweet balances vata also. So sweet can be good. The interesting thing is that for me, actually, I do take turmeric and ginger, and cinnamon and cardamom are very good balancers for me. And cinnamon is very good because it balances sugars, and it also is helpful in the, so that sugar doesn't go out of balance in our bodies. So cinnamon is a good spice for most people. And of course, a big part of Ayurveda is meditation. It's part of the balancing for every dosha. And the other part is a yearly cleanse for rejuvenation and healing. And this is something that Americans also are not used to doing on a regular basis. And many people who come from Europe and other parts, well, I remember when hearing about my grandparents who came from Ukraine and parts of Russia and Poland. They went for something called they went to have their own little sweat lodges called the Turkish baths. And so this thing that the yearly cleanse or the yearly rejuvenating cleanse in Ayurveda is called the Panchakarma. It has to do with, it cleanses 5 different parts of the body. And if disease is seen as an accumulation of excesses in one or more of the doshas, this Panchakarma involves a very simple diet for a couple of weeks. Many times it is dal and vegetables. It's the taking of certain herbs as cleansers that clean out the lymph system, which is where a lot of things happen, and even goes into some parts of the brain barrier. And I know this is a part that, Nina, I don't think you like, but there is ghee involved in some of this. But it's supposed to cleanse lymph and bile. It uses purging, which I know is not a pleasant thing. It uses specific enemas and specific, this thing we talked about, oil massage. There's very specific massages during the Panchakarma, which I've done in India. I've actually gone to Kerala, which is one of the southern province of India, and I've had a traditional Panchakarma there. And you know, now the science can never show that, you know, there's things about the elements or, you know, pitta and vata. We couldn't prove that there's pitta and vata, but we can show, and the science shows that the levels of wellness and health, not just subjectively or immunity, energy and vitality, are improved for months and months after this rejuvenating cleanse. And that's science. That's not just because they measured different qualities within the body. So the idea of cleanse and the idea of fasting, which is almost a fast within this, have a lot of good science behind it. And maybe that's why Ayurveda is still around, is because it works.
Yeah. What on the ghee, GHEE? So it's a clarified butter. And
yes.
the reason why I tell people not to have it is because it's high in saturated fat. It's high in cholesterol. It's actually, if you look at the composition, it's worse than butter.
I know, it is.
There is a vegan ghee. So if people want to try that, can. So that has no cholesterol, but it is high in saturated fat. So that's an option. But
that's good to know. Let me explain what the ghee part is in this. And I understand your hesitancy, and sure, I agree with you mostly about ghee is just as another butter that's not good for your cholesterol levels and anything else. I think it's used for about 5 days in some amounts, and what it leads to eventually, it's supposed to be a cleanser of a lot of parts of the body, even though I know we're taught to think of ghee as mostly a villain in that. But along with the lymph cleansers and other herbs, what it's leading to is the purge, which is that eventually you will purge your body of a lot of things, which the ghee seems to be a cleanser also. And I understand if people are resistant to doing that. And maybe some people...
because it's not, I mean, you don't...
I understand.
It clogs. That's
I know.
Food clog. But yeah,
yes.
I mean, there's certain elements of any type of,
yes.
you know, like Ayurvedic, you can take what you want. Don't...
I think so. I think so. And I think that, you know, even without that, there are things about it. There are very specific enemas that are supposedly they're actually stimulating of the liver, which is interesting. But anyway, I mean, if someone's really interested, they could look up Panchakarma, or I would say, I mean, there are Ayurvedic centers in almost all areas. You could do some research. And as we said, you can go to Banyan Botanicals and ask some questions. I wouldn't even recommend somebody go full hog into this until they've done a lot of research on their own. And
Yeah.
I'll actually mention some of the books that I think are helpful. There's a book, well, this is one written by a doctor that I worked with for a long time. It's called Ayurveda, the Ancient Indian Healing Art. I worked with this guy for many years, probably 20 years, Dr. Scott Gerson, MD. It gives you a lot of the background of Ayurveda and the history. This person, his name is Vasant Lad. He's very famous in the field. And there's a lot of Ayurvedic remedies that might be interesting to people. They're not within the regular remedies that we think of, that most Americans would be familiar with, but it's worth looking at and seeing if there are things that might be helpful. And here's another book called Ayurveda, Secrets of Healing. And it's a real interesting text that has a lot to teach about this system and the holistic system of healing that Ayurveda is, because it's really such an involved, and I won't call it just a science in the modern sense, but there's so much about it to learn and to understand. And I think you're right, Nina. I think it's like most things. You take what you think is helpful to you, and maybe there are parts of it that are not appealing and may not be helpful. So I've used it over the years and think it really does contribute to balance. And I think Ayurvedically, and when I work with clients, I'll often discuss with them, like if I see someone who's my client and they're throwing themselves out of balance by drinking ice water in the middle of winter, I'll say something. I'll say, well, what are you eating during the day? And what is your exercise routine? And how are you managing this season? So I include that in my therapy. Because out of balance doesn't just mean your mind is out of balance. It means that your body and mind are connected.
Right. And don't they also use grounding in Ayurvedic medicine? Like, they say to go outside and put your feet in the grass and,
Yes. I'm glad you bring up that part of it. Yes.
And the thing about that is that we have so many people that are removing their lawns and they're putting in the fake grass, which is full of chemicals. So I'm like looking around and there's no real grass in my neighborhood.
Yes, no, I know. Unfortunately, the replacements for grass are sometimes not good. Yeah, I think like an image of a very deep, mindful Ayurvedic thing would be that you're walking by water would be one thing. Like, let's say you're by a bay and you're walking, and the deep sense of peace that comes from even just taking a slow meditative walk, or as you said, putting your feet on the grass or sitting in the sun or maybe in the shade, but being outside, things like light. In Ayurveda, they say, well, we're a planet that's very related to the movement of the sun or the sun's energy. We're completely bound by the sun's energy. And that's an interesting observation because it's saying, well, that's what we are. We're creatures of the sun. All of our sleep and eating cycles and the rhythms that go along with it. Well, that's that. Or how about this? When we fly, let's say we go into an airplane, well, Ayurveda would say, well, we're not animals that were meant to fly. We throw ourselves out of balance sometimes when we fly, when we cross continents and we go into different time zones. And I know we're going to do that at times, but it's just an interesting thing about seeing the most basic part of what it means to be human. And I think that's what Ayurveda does well. And a lot of it is connected to spirituality and yoga and meditation. And I think what they're saying is that if your body and other parts of your being are out of balance, how can you even be that spiritual or that balanced in your psychology? It's all connected.
Yeah, and it said, I think my understanding is that it's recommended that when you get up around sunrise and
Mhm.
look outside, touch something soft. I'm thinking pet my cat, smell something delicious,
Yes.
see something beautiful, look at the flowers, and do something relaxing. And if people don't like meditation, there's guided meditation.
Yes. Yes. That's so true. Yes.
Oh goodness, I think we lost him. So I'll just finish up for him. So he does offer a 5-week course for, not for Ayurveda, but for people who have a lot of stress or who need therapy, someone to talk to. And I'll put the link to how to contact him. I'll put the Banyan Botanical website below and some of the things that we talked about. So if you have any questions, go ahead and write to us. And I hope to see you soon. Hope you liked this video and information on Ayurveda.